Thom Hartmann is an award-winning author, radio host, teacher, and psychotherapist. He's written 6 books as part of the Hidden History series, covering controversial and important subjects and institutions in the United States, like the Supreme Court, gun control, and healthcare. A former journalist and editor, Thom now lives in Portland, Oregon. Please join me in welcoming Thom Hartmann.
Thank you, Shinyi. And thank you so much to all of you for showing up here tonight with Seattle Town Hall. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's such a great organization and such a great venue. When I wrote this book, I wanted to do a deep dive into this broad topic of privacy and Big Brother. I mean, you know, the Big Brother, of course, the phrase from George Orwell back when he wrote 1984 referenced pretty much exclusively the idea that Big Brother was government. And so, you know, part of the book is about government, Big Brother, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But I don't think Orwell anticipated a corporate Big Brother. And that's one that is also very troubling and concerning, and something that we all need to learn more about, know more about, and frankly, do something about, and something reasonable. So I'm going to touch on both of those tonight. And then there's kind of a political Big Brother aspect to all this too, which I'll get to in just a moment. So starting out, I guess that, you know, the first question that people sometimes ask is, you know, why is there no privacy in the Constitution? Why does the word privacy not appear? Why was it that it really wasn't until 1961 that the word privacy appeared in any consequential way before the US Supreme Court, for example? And the reason why is that, and it was fascinating finding this out, going back, digging through old dictionaries from the 1700s, was that in the 1700s, we didn't have bathrooms. In fact, the tub was typically near the kitchen where the hot water was heated on the stove, so it could be put in the tub. And we didn't have we didn't have, quote, bathrooms, and we didn't have what you might refer to today as toilets. It wasn't until the 1860s that Thomas Crapper popularized the flush toilet in a big way. And so basically you had outhouses back then. And when you wanted to excuse yourself in polite company from the room and say, excuse me, I need to use the bathroom, is how we would say it today, or words to that effect, what you would say is, excuse me, I need some privacy. And because privacy meant toilet functions in private. The only place, and the only place, in fact, I searched all, we now have online versions of all, there are digital versions of, you know, all of Jefferson's writings, Madison's writings, Hamilton's writings, Adams's writings. I went through all of it. And the only place where I could find the word privacy, even once, was in Federalist number 69, where Hamilton was criticizing the state of New York for allowing their governor to be selected by 3 men in secret. And he used the word, the phrase in private, or in privacy rather, which meant, you know, something kind of dirty and something kind of behind closed doors. So the framers of the Constitution just didn't think it would be appropriate to include toilet functions in the Constitution, and that's why it's not there. But it very much does exist in the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment gives you the right not only to speak and to peaceably assemble, but also to choose not to speak, and presumably to keep your assemblies, you know, to yourself, as it were. The Third Amendment protects your right to not have to quarter soldiers in your home, which would be an invasion of your privacy. The Fourth Amendment is the one that's the most explicit, which says that, you know, we have the right to security in our persons, papers, homes, and effects, you know, barring warrants and things like that. I'm paraphrasing. The Fifth Amendment has a right to privacy in it, in as much as you cannot be forced to reveal things you have said or done in private if you think that it would incriminate you. And arguably the Ninth Amendment kind of wraps that all up. But that's the beginning of it. Going back into history, you know, staying in the 1700s for a minute, there were 2 specific and separate times in the United States and places in the United States where the right to privacy was really under assault. And we had government that I think would qualify as Orwellian Big Brother. The first was, well, actually they overlap in time, but the first I'll mention was the fate of Quakers, and particularly Quaker women throughout the 1600s and the early 1700s in New England. We had a full-blown theocracy in northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. And I opened the book with John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, The Women Who Came from Dover. And, it's the true story of these three young women who were Quakers and who defied the local church. This was a time and a place where you had to pay taxes to the church. If you didn't show up for Sunday services, you were put in the stocks or you could be punished. They repeatedly defied this wackadoodle pastor. Or wackadoodle is too mild. He was evil. And so he ordered them, or he got the town constable to order them, but he supervised the whole process. This was in the dead of winter. Ordered them, and there was 4 feet of snow on the ground, ordered them to be tied to the back of a horse cart, stripped naked to the waist, and whipped until bloody in Dover, New Hampshire, and then dragged on the back of this horse cart, or pulled by their wrists, to the next town, where they repeated the process. They did it through 3 or 4 towns, and finally a constable in the 4th or 5th towns put a stop to it. But that was the thought police. You were not allowed to have your thoughts to yourself, and it was as Big Brother as it can get. The other, obviously, is slavery. I mean, first of all, from the point of view of any of the Africans who were brought to this continent and impressed into slavery, there was no freedom. It was absolute Big Brother, absolute violent thought police, and no privacy whatsoever, obviously, throughout that entire period. And there are still lingering pieces of that we see in the way that police treat, by and large, Black people to this day. But but in the South, in particular, you go back to my when my book, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, came out. There's about a quarter of the book devoted to this. So I just touch on it briefly in Big Brother, but by the 1840s, certainly the mid 1840s, the South, what became the Confederacy, had ceased altogether to be a democracy. Ballot boxes were routinely stuffed. Votes were foregone conclusions. Only a very limited number of people were even allowed to run for public office. There were about 1,000 families in the South who basically were oligarchs, giant old line plantation families. A lot of this came out of the invention of the cotton gin, which allowed a plantation that could afford one. They were very expensive. They came into the marketplace around 1810. And so the plantations that could afford them, the cotton gin made them 50 times more efficient than a plantation that didn't have one. One gin could clean as much cotton in a day as 50 enslaved people. And so this gave huge economies of scale to these large plantations, and they just started wiping out their small competitors and buying them up and turning them into sharecroppers. And I'm talking about white people now. And anybody who dared object to this economic neo-fascism would be beaten, imprisoned, hanged, run out of town. And so by 1840, or certainly by 1845, the South was a full-blown fascist state. Now, you have to have a police state to enforce slavery to begin with, and the South had been a police state since the 1600s. But it became a full-blown fascist state as a consequence of this fascinating economic change in the early 1800s by the 1840s. And so the Civil War was really a war between a fascist oligarchy in the South and a democratic republic in the North. So those were the two. And in the book, when I talk about what happened in the South, I quote at some length from Frederick Douglass's first autobiography, which is just breathtaking read. And he was talking about how when he was, as I recall, 7 years old, the wife of the man who owned him and his family was teaching him to read. She wanted to cure him of being a heathen by helping him to learn to read the Bible. And she did a great job of it, and she was, and her husband didn't know. And one day her husband came in while she was giving Frederick a reading lesson, and she bragged about it to her husband. And he went on a rant about how, when these people learn how to read, then they're no good for slavery. At which point Douglas thought, oh, I need to learn to read. And that was how he began to break out of his big brother and become one of America's most famous and brilliant orators and writers. And so those are the two times in American history where, they go way beyond McCarthyism, where we had Big Brother that was widespread, extensive. The idea that it can't happen here is just crazy. It has happened here twice. So I lay that out. But now we're seeing this, spreading around the world, and we're seeing the tools of Big Brother becoming ubiquitous in the United States. We have not yet seen our government exercising them, although I can tell you many of the people who were arrested on January 6th in the Capitol would argue this point. But by and large, we have not seen these tools being used to infringe on our freedoms or to intimidate us. Or largely for political purposes. But the fact that they exist, and the fact that we had for 4 years a man as president who very much wanted to tear down the Bill of Rights, tear down our Constitution, and turn us into an autocratic oligarchy, and would have had he been reelected, and has said as much, should give us all pause. So, a couple of, well, actually, let me start with the extreme end of where this thing could end up if government were to go down this road, just using the tools that are extant right now. And that would be the Chinese social credit system. And, we're all familiar with credit scores, right? And you got, banks and whatnot offering to advertising, we'll help you with your credit score, and we'll give you free access to your credit score and all this kind of stuff. Well, the social credit score is sort of like that, except it's not just based on whether you've bounced a check in the last year. Or the last 10 years, it is, it's quite comprehensive. And just to share with you a little bit, people who score poorly can lose their ability to travel. China blocked 29 million air tickets and 6 million high-speed rail tickets just in 2019, based on people having low social credit scores. You would be unable to book a restaurant or a hotel reservation. Your internet gets slowed down. You lose the ability to get high status jobs or enroll your children in prestigious private schools or universities. On the other hand, if you have a high social credit score, you get better and faster service and reservations, hotels, restaurants, preferred access to high quality schools, shorter waits at hospitals and doctors' offices, and discounts across a broad range of products and services, and better employment offers. And also, with a low social credit score, many of the dating services, which are very popular right now, simply won't take you. So, the core idea is of the social credit system is, and this is, a quote from the Chinese government: if trust is broken in one place, essentially by one individual, restrictions are imposed on that individual in all places, everywhere. And so, and also with a low social credit score, your face can show up online, on billboards, or even on a wall of shame type of reel that plays in theaters before movies. You can redeem yourself. You can improve your social credit score by doing volunteer work, by giving blood, by being a good citizen. Things that can drop your social credit score include things like playing loud music in public, or getting into public confrontations, or hanging out with other people with low social credit scores, or challenging the government in any way on anything. You can, and the fastest way to get your score back up, although it can take 2 to 5 years, is to praise the government on social media. That's where we don't want to end up, I think, speaking for most Americans. And so, here we go. So what are some of these tools? Well, back in 2017, 3 Donald Trump supporters got together. One of them had just come up with a new facial recognition software. These were very wealthy people. And they came up with a company. It's called ClearView AI, as in artificial intelligence. The idea that they had was, let's scrape literally billions of pictures off Facebook. This was before Facebook put an end to the ability to do this. Let's scrape these pictures off Facebook. Let's run them through the facial recognition algorithm that we have. Let's buy massive amounts of data from data brokers and create an app where somebody could just take a picture of somebody, pop it into the app, and the entire person's, everything that's known about them would come up. You know, every website they've visited, every book they've ever bought, every product that they've ever bought, every credit card they have, every trip they've ever taken, anything that has ever popped them into the news, any problem or troubles that they've ever been in, where they went to school, how they did, what their grades were, all these. I mean, in fact, the average data that is held on us by many of these companies is far more extensive than that. There's this whole collection of pages in the book here that are just tiny type of all the things that are typical just at base level of what most of the data brokers know about you. Typically, a data broker will have between 2,000 and 3,000 data points on every American. There are some who brag that they have 15,000 to 20,000 data points on you that they're willing to sell. And so with the ClearView AI app, they pulled this thing off. These Trump supporters, they put it together, and as they were raising money for it, they gave it to a few billionaires who were kicking money in. One of them, and this is from a New York Times story about it. One of them was having dinner with his wife in a restaurant, a very fancy restaurant, and his daughter walked in with a date that he had never met before. His daughter didn't know that her father and his wife, her mother, were in the restaurant. Her dad had the app on his phone. He took a picture of her date and then walked over and introduced himself and told her date that he knew where he went to school and what his grades were and what he had done extracurricular. Just totally freaked this kid out. And you can imagine, sitting at a bar or in a restaurant all by yourself, and somebody walks up and tells you everything about your life. I mean, it would be pretty creepy. This product is now in use as of about 6 months ago by more than 3,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States and 27 countries. And now Microsoft has rolled out their version of something like this called Microsoft Azure. And a Russian company called Entech Lab rolled a product out very similar to this around the same time. This was in late 2016. Their product they made available to the general public. And the New York Times noted, quote, within months of its release, it was reported that people were using the app to identify sex workers, porn stars, and protesters. And so they pulled it out of public use, but now this app is in use by the Russian government in all of the public cameras, which are all over Moscow and all over all the major cities. So you've got, Big Brother going on there in collaboration with big tech, Big Brother. So there's that. Another dimension, again, in the government realm is warfare. Is cyber warfare. And there's some pretty amazing stuff, some background on this. Back in 2010, the Iranian government was enriching uranium. They had a bunch of centrifuges running, enriching uranium, and it was a big concern for the American and the Israeli governments. And their budget that year for cybersecurity was $76 million, the whole Iranian government's budget. And so the US and Israel released, neither has ever admitted it, but it's common knowledge, released a worm, a virus called the Stuxnet virus, or worm, that burrowed into these centrifuges, the computers controlling the centrifuges, and caused them to spin so fast that they shattered and fell apart and disintegrated and died. And it shut down the Iranian nuclear program. So that following year in 2010, or in 2011, excuse me, Iran, this is from the Army War College, Iran invested at least $1 billion in cyber technology, infrastructure, and expertise. By March 2012, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed that it recruited 120,000 personnel to combat a soft cyber war, and the IRCC referred to themselves as and it was generally viewed by the War College anyway, as, quote, the fourth biggest cyber power among the world's cyber armies. So then they started flexing their muscles on this. Shelley Adelson, who was he's passed away now, but he's the guy who owned the Sands and a very big supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu and of Donald Trump, billionaire, a Las Vegas billionaire and a major Republican donor. Shelley Adelson had given a speech in which he suggested that if Iran continued to be bellicose, that somebody should just drop a nuclear bomb, outside of Tehran, out in the desert, just by way of saying, hey, look at what we can do to you. And so then, the result of that was that the Iran came in. Let me find it here. Iranian hackers made their way inside. That's the Russian hackers. Well, yeah, they made their way inside the computers at the Sands Hotel, and every single computer got bricked. Every computer in the building. They all got their hard drives were turned into boat anchors, and the screens showed a picture of Netanyahu and what's his name, the billionaire donor, and it said, "Don't let your tongue cut your mouth or cut your throat," was the phrase, with Shelley Adelson and Benjamin Netanyahu. And so having had that victory, they then decided to come after the Arthur R. Bowman Dam, which backs up the Crooked River here in Oregon. And this dam is up river of a town called Pineville, excuse me. And, which was built largely after the dam. And if the dam were rapidly opened, it would literally drown thousands of people and rip apart over 10,000 homes. So the Iranians tried to hack into it, and thinking that they had hacked into it, they released the water. Turned out that they had, by mistake, hacked into the Bowman Dam in New York rather than the Bowman Dam in Oregon. And the Bowman Dam in New York only controlled a small stream. So they weren't able to do any damage, and this is when we figured out what was going on. Now, in response to that, President Obama was president, and in response to these two attacks on the United States by Iran that were both publicized actually fairly widely, he proposed legislation, and the Democrats passed it out of the House of Representatives, legislation that would require all the companies that control essential infrastructure in the United States, all the privatized infrastructure, dams, bridges, bridges that can lift up and go down, nuclear power plants, substations, electric substations, utilities, water supplies, septic supplies, all of these things that would require these private companies to harden to a certain standard their internet connected computers against possible Iranian activity. And that bill, while it made it out of the House of Representatives, and this is from the New York Times, quote, Senate Republicans argued that the minimum standards were too burdensome for businesses. By late January, had managed to change the legislation to make them optional. In early August, the bill essentially died when it was blocked by a Republican filibuster. So to this day, there are no mandatory requirements on companies that have privatized American infrastructure. And our vulnerability is absolutely massive in that regard. The other thing that Barack Obama did is he created this legislation would have created an agency to do this. That was blocked again by the Republicans, but he created an agency by executive order within the White House, an Office of Internet Security. I forget the exact name for it, and gave it a budget. It had a director. His name was Daniels, his last name. And they had 22 employees, and they operated out of the Eisenhower office building right next door to the White House in Washington, D.C. And they were doing a great job. They were hardening, going through all of the government computers. They were doing for government what that legislation would have required private industry to do, and hardening our systems and things like that. That sadly kind of fell apart when Donald Trump became president. One of the first things he did was shut that office down, fire Daniels, lay off the staff, closed it, And by the end of Donald Trump's presidency, we had learned, in fact, in the last year of his presidency, we had learned that the Russians were definitely inside virtually all the computers in the Commerce Department and all of the computers in the Treasury Department. And God only knows where else they are. We're still trying to find them. President Biden has been fighting a real uphill battle here in the last, 16 months he's been president, trying to put our cybersecurity back together after Donald Trump blew it up and opened the door to the Russians. So, and all the, I lay out all the documentation on that. I'm giving it kind of a short form here. Also, the other thing that we saw was what the Russians had done with Ukraine. This was, around the time of the seizure of Crimea, and they just basically bricked everything. This is Alan Greenberg writing for Wired. On a national scale, the Russian virus was eating Ukraine's computers alive. It would hit at least 4 hospitals in Kyiv alone, 6 power companies, 2 airports, 22 Ukrainian banks, ATMs and card payment systems, and retailers and transport, and practically every federal agency. The government was dead, summarized their infrastructure minister. 10% of all the computers in the country were bricked, permanently destroyed. More than 300 companies were shut down and lost everything on their computer systems. Checkout systems in stores went down. Gas stations couldn't process payments, so their pumps stopped working. Banks went down. Not only people were unable to access their balances, but some banking information was simply lost forever. The money just evaporated. And this again was during the Biden administration, or during the Obama administration. And this is another thing that Barack Obama used as, hey, look at this, we got to do something. And the Republicans basically said, no, we don't. And so, there we are. When Trump shut this down, by the way, John Bolton, his national security advisor, quoted Alexander Hamilton when he was asked by the press, why did you shut down the cybersecurity office? And he said, quote, eliminating another layer of bureaucracy delivers greater decision, activity, secrecy, and dispatch. Right. So, and Trump then, the Department of Homeland Security had a cybersecurity office also. That was manned and run by a fellow by the name of Christopher Krebs. Trump fired him too and didn't replace him. And then when all this came out, this was reported by the Associated Press on December 19th, 2020. This is what the AP said, quote, contradicting his Secretary of State and other top officials, President Donald Trump on Saturday suggested without evidence that China, not Russia, was behind the cyber espionage operation in the United States, right? So you get a sense of what cyber war might be like. And the Ukrainians are not experiencing that quite so badly this time because they learned from the last experience. We have not yet in this country. So that's the corporate, or that's the government side of it. Also actually, I'll get to the GDPR in the solution section. In terms of corporate Big Brother, massive amounts of information on all of us. I showed you that long list in the book. It goes on for three or four pages of just the very granular data that basic data brokers will sell on each one of us. And it is being used for things like, oh, so you're looking for a job? Well, the HireVue, for example, scores you on 20,000 data points we collect, including, quote, the content of the verbal response, intonation, and nonverbal communications. They have clients like Walgreens, Hyatt, and Wendy's. And so there's that. There's another company called Sift that does this for Starbucks and OpenTable and Wayfair and Instacart. They claim that they have over 16,000 signals that inform the Sift score, according to Christopher Mims in the Wall Street Journal in 2019. He said it's like a credit score, but for overall trustworthiness. So one of these companies actually, part of the information that they sell is whether anybody has browsed your competitors and in real time. So a company may run an ad that says, we match all prices. We've got the lowest price. We guarantee to match all prices. So you browse around and you discover, hey, I can get a better price over here on the Acme site. And so you call them up to say that. And as soon as your phone number hits their phone, it pings this data company who immediately knows who you are, pulls up all the data, looks at your browsing history in real time and says to this company, essentially, don't answer the phone, or let it ring for an hour, put them on hold for an hour because they just hit 3 websites looking for comparative prices. I mean, this is how granular it is. If you call an airline or if you call a phone company and try to get customer service, if these companies have told them that you're not a potential high flyer customer, or that you have a history of calling customer service or making demands of, that the product do what it says, then you will end up on hold for hours. On the other hand, if you're a high flyer and you very rarely make those kind of calls, then you get through right away. You can also be blocked from returning merchandise. You can be blocked from getting store credit cards. There was one drugstore chain in the United States that combined one of these data operations with facial recognition for about 6 years before they got outed in the New York Times. They quit doing it. But they would literally, as you walked in the store, they would know who you were. They would know all about you. And that would determine how they treated you as a customer when you were in the store, whether you got followed around or whether you got helped or whether you got steered to expensive products or inexpensive products, these kinds of things. So, there's data companies that do this for landlords. There's data companies that do this for retailers. It's just all over the place, and it's absolutely massive. Let's see. Oh, page 67. Let me just grab that. Let's see. Yeah, this is another thing. Donald Trump and IG, we are the only country in the developed world where the company that brings the internet into your home, which is the only company that has direct access to your computer, I mean, your computer is literally connected to their server, has the legal right to monitor everything you do, every keystroke, every web page you look at, every email you get, every email you send. And I'm not talking about the wrapper. They can read every single word in all of it. Every bit of data that goes through your computer goes through your internet service provider. In every other country in the world, those internet service providers cannot spy on people. And in the United States, that was the case up until just a couple of years ago. Our internet data was protected under what was called Title II of the Telecommunications Act, which was passed back in the 1930s to protect phone calls. So right now, and what happened was, and this is the law that says that if you want to, if a police agency wants to listen in on your phone calls, they've got to have a warrant, or if the phone company wants to listen in on your phone calls, somebody has to issue a warrant. And, very rigorous law. And Ajit Pai, who was a former Verizon lawyer, Donald Trump put him in charge of the FCC, and Ajit Pai blew up that law, ended net neutrality in the United States, which net neutrality sounds so plain vanilla. But what that means is now your internet service provider can literally see everything you're doing, can record it, and can sell it. And as far as we can tell, many of them do, although this is very much on the down low kind of practice right now, because these companies are very sensitive. They don't want to stir things up in a way that would cause, a new movement asking for net neutrality. But it's pretty grim stuff. And so that, that's your internet service providers. Then another dimension of this and the irony of this is that if you're using your smartphone and you're making a phone call and the phone call is bouncing off the tower of the telephone provider, that's covered under Title II of the Telecommunications Act. Nobody can listen in on that. But if you've turned on internet phone assistance on your phone, then your phone calls don't go through the cell tower, they go through your local Wi-Fi in your home, and then your internet service provider can listen to everything, including your phone conversations, which is totally weird. I mean, they can also, when you're using your phone, any data you're looking at, even though it's going through the cell tower, the cell phone companies can track all your data. They just can't track your phone calls. Again, because of this change in the law that Trump and Pai brought us, very kindly. There are also these devices called Stingrays. And I first learned about these when I was living in Washington, D.C. And my studio was down on 14th Street by K Street, and we were living in a marina Well, you don't need to know the geography because it probably would be meaningless. But anyhow, I walked by the White House every afternoon on my way home from work. And I started noticing around the middle of the Obama administration that whenever I would walk by the White House, my phone would get hot. And, just walking maybe 6 blocks, 3 blocks to the White House and 3 blocks past it, my phone would just be behaving totally weird. And I'd lose 20% of my battery, in just 6 blocks. And then it would go back to normal. And I couldn't figure this out. I talked about it on the air. I talked about it on my program. I said, does anybody know what's going on here? It's like my phone is being hacked or something. And then it came out that it was publicized. I think it was the Israeli government that got outed, but we've since learned there were several governments involved in this, that they had these Stingray devices. And the way a Stingray device works is it's like a box that on one end connects to a cell tower. And the cell tower thinks it's just a cell phone, so it allows data and phone calls to pass through the cell tower. And then there's the box, connected to the computer of whoever's running the Stingray. And then the other end of the Stingray is an antenna that mimics a cell tower. So if you walk close enough to the Stingray, your phone is always looking for the closest cell tower, the strongest signal, so that you get good quality uninterrupted, calls. And so if you walk by a Stingray, your phone will latch onto it, thinking it's latching onto your Verizon tower or your T-Mobile tower or whatever it may be. And the Stingray then has access to everything on your phone, and they can just drain your phone. And, when I learned that, I thought of that often during the 4 years that Trump was in the White House, when it became public that he refused to use the secure phones that the Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon wanted him to use, and instead just used a consumer grade Android phone throughout his presidency. And because it was more comfortable for him to tweet on it. And so, I don't think that, hopefully they kept a lot of the nation's secrets from him, because any that went to him are probably now public knowledge. So and then I said I would mention political big brother. This is particularly fascinating. This was something that we learned back in the middle of the Trump years, was that in the 2016 election, the Donald Trump election, and in the 2018 election, the Ted Cruz's election, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz had both hired this company called Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica, sort of like ClearView AI, had scraped a mind-boggling amount of data. They claimed that they had more than 2,000 data points on more than 220 million Americans. Mark Zuckerberg came out and said, no, it's only 87 million Americans, but still, and they had such granular data about people, stuff that, who their relatives were, what their gender identity was, what brand of cigarettes they smoked, whether they ever rode a motorcycle, what their first car was, where they lived, what kind of flowers they liked, what kind of pets they had, what the names of their pets were. They had just this super granular data on these people. And so at the height of the campaign, of the Trump campaign, they would take a single ad, and the main, they had two. This was actually called a voter suppression campaign within the Trump campaign, within Cambridge Analytica, because they were going after two principal demographics. One was weak Democratic voters, people who had voted Democratic but might also have voted for Republican or didn't vote in every election, Democratic voters who could basically be convinced not to show up. And the other group that they went after were African Americans in swing states. And they developed on some days as many as 50,000 variations on one single ad. And the principal message of these ads, which was amplified by Russian trolls on social media, as Robert Mueller pointed out, and he indicted 12 Russian intelligence officers for this. The principal message that they sent out was twofold. It was to the Black community, it was clips of Hillary Clinton and her super predator comment or references to it, and basically saying Hillary Clinton is not your friend. And to the weak Democratic constituency, the weak Democrats, the principal message, and this again was the main message of the Russian trolls and continues to be to this day, by the way, was there's not much difference between the Democratic and Republican Party. They're both corrupt. It's all corrupt. Why even bother voting? And this was quite consequential, the effects of this. In fact, they called it deterrence was their word. So there was one day in October, the third presidential debate in October, just before the election, where they pushed out 175,000 variations of one ad. And so each one of those variations would have one little tweak so that maybe your cat would be in it with your cat's name, or your motorcycle, or your, something about your girlfriend, or, whatever it may be. I mean, they were literally custom, or more general things for cat lovers or dog lovers or cat haters, or, and these are just, and we really don't know what all those things were, because out of these hundreds of thousands of different ads that the Trump campaign ran, we've only seen a few hundred of them, because they would pop up on very specific people's screens. You'd see it, and then it would go away, and it would vanish forever. And Facebook has not been forthcoming in saying, well, here's the ads, to the best of my knowledge. So what was the effect of this? Well, for example, this was just in Wisconsin. Trump won Wisconsin by 27,000 votes. And so this is from the New York Times. Keep in mind, the goal was to suppress the black vote, to cause people not to turn out to vote. And he won Wisconsin by 27,000 votes. And the biggest drop was in District 15 of Milwaukee. Milwaukee was ground zero for these kinds of ads on Facebook by the Trump campaign. The biggest drop was here in District 15, a stretch of fading wooden homes, sandwich shops, and fast food restaurants at 84% black. In the district, voter turnout declined by 19.5%, according to Neil Elbrecht, executive director of the City of Milwaukee Election Commission. Trump had carried Wisconsin by 27,000 votes. Turnout was down in most counties throughout the state, but particularly in Milwaukee County, where nearly 60,000 fewer votes were cast than in 2012. Clinton earned 43,000 fewer votes in this Democratic stronghold than had Barack Obama 4 years earlier, which is more than could be accounted for by the fact that Obama was black, Clinton was not, when you compare it to previous elections. So this clearly is, a large part of the reason why Donald Trump ended up in the White House, between that and the help of the Russian trolls and the Russian hacks into the DNC's server and Hillary Clinton's emails. So, and here's another, this one has people still scratching their heads, and I'll end with this, well, I'll give you some solutions and then pick up your questions. And that is this absolutely amazing story. It was a Sunday night in June of 2020, the last year of the Trump presidency. And here in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and in over 100 small towns across America, one Saturday afternoon, or one early Sunday evening, white people showed up with axes, guns, hammers, shovels, baseball bats, whatever weapons they could, because they were convinced that George Soros had paid for busloads of black BLM Antifa activists, was the phrase, to come to their town, rape their women, and burn down their town, do riots and all kinds of horrible things. And this was like heavily promoted across Facebook and other social media. Nobody knows who made this thing happen. To this day, nobody knows. And one of the better guesses is that it was a Russian effort testing how easily they could disrupt America and how easily they could mobilize people, which leads you to wonder about the role of foreigners in January 6th, for example, which we now know just from reporting in the last week was largely planned on Facebook also. And to what extent was that purely indigenous, and to what extent was that coming from outside? So this was from the tiny town of Forks, Washington, all the way to Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Similar stories played out in Danville, California, to Jacksonville, Florida, as reported in NBC News. And we're still scratching our heads. So what can we do about this? Well, first of all, we could restore net neutrality. It would be a good first step. Number two, we need to do something about Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, which basically allows, and I realize I'm running long here, my apologies, but I think this is really important. Prior to 1996, when this was put into law, let me frame this. If you were to put a sign out in front of your house that said, "Big party tonight, come on in," and the front door was wide open, and people just came into your house and did all kinds of terrible things. So somebody in the back room raping somebody over here shooting heroin, somebody over here, selling illegal pornography in your house, and the police come in to raid your house, you would be held accountable for all those crimes, in addition to the criminals themselves who would be arrested, because you can't host a party like that. It's illegal. You're responsible for what goes on in your house. And this is the way it was on the internet up until 1996. In 1981, Nigel Peacock and I, he's still my webmaster, he's an old friend who lives in the UK, ran about 30 forums on CompuServe, Macintosh, IBM, all kinds of forums. And CompuServe paid us very well. We had about 30 people who worked for us because we had to vet every single message that was on CompuServe, or at least every single person. We'd have trusted people, who could post because of that liability. Well, what Section 230 did was it said, if you build a house on, in Seattle and do this, you still go to jail. But if you build a house on the internet and invite people in and they commit crimes and you know about it and you still let it happen, you're good. No liability whatsoever. And that's when Mark Zuckerberg became one of the richest men in America. So I think we need to do something about that. And that's kind of a bipartisan thing. One of the Republicans, Josh Hawley, who's going to be running for president in 2 years, wrote a book about this. I mean, this is bipartisan. So also Europe has really, really rigorous laws about data privacy. It's why when you hit websites, it says, will you take a cookie? Those websites want to be able to be viewed in Europe. California has strengthened some of their data laws, and we need to go a lot farther than that. So that's the book in broad strokes. And let me toss it back to Candace for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Thom. I do have a couple of questions. We'll get to as many as we can. So the first one, are there any countries that you would point to as being better? You kind of just touched on this a little bit, but are there any countries that you would point to as being better on privacy rights, and why are they better?
Yeah, the entire European Union has been operating largely in lockstep on this, and the general data regulation scheme, or whatever it's called, there's an acronym for it. I'm forgetting the acronym now, but the GDPR. That's something that we should adopt here. But beyond that, I don't know of any particular country that has done a really spectacular job. Those rules, though, that Europe has adopted have been largely adopted also by South Korea, by Taiwan, by Japan, by Australia, by other countries. We're the laggards on the block. We're the only country that doesn't have these kind of protections, and we're the only country that allows ISPs and other companies to basically snoop on you.
And it seems to me like a lot of times we blame that on legislators not understanding the internet.
It's a convenient excuse for taking money.
Yeah, right. But if other countries have it, then yeah. That's not quite it.
We're also the country whose Supreme Court has said that if rich people or corporations want to own politicians, that's not bribery, it's free speech.
Right. Let's see, next one. Trump Republicans aside, can you talk through a little bit of the history of Republicans simultaneously being the party of small government, but also being the party that created the Department of Homeland Security?
Yeah, this is also in the book. This whole, the leap toward Big Brother in the United States that Edward Snowden kind of revealed to us all was largely after 9/11. I mean, it had been accumulating for some time in ways that a lot of civil libertarians were very concerned about. But and the various pieces of legislation have been proposed throughout the 90s in particular that would create what were described by both Democrats and Republicans at various times as a police state in the United States. Those all got cobbled together into the Patriot Act, and it got passed after 9/11 in this big panic. And also this word Homeland, which had never been used in the United States before, which just fireworks went off for me in 2003 when this happened. This was the word that in 1937, when Rudolf Hess introduced Adolf Hitler at the Munich big event, he rolled out this word. And the Nazis had taken it from the Zionists who wanted a homeland for Jews. And Hess said, Danke, Herr Führer, Heimat, so say there will be a homeland for all, über die ganze Welt, over the whole world. And Germany started using this word homeland and blood and soil, and we're from the soil. And it became the phrase. I mean, it was always Vaterland before that, fatherland. But after 1937, it was homeland. We had never used that word in the United States. It's a very blood and soil, right-wing fascist word. And when Bush rolled this thing out as the Department of Homeland Security, I went nuts. So, we've all become inured to it now, but it was truly a bizarre situation. So I think that I guess I'll just leave my comment at that so we can get to other questions, but
Sure, yeah.
It's troubling.
Yeah, this whole topic is troubling.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the history of social big brother that we see with things like the abortion law in Texas, citizens spying on citizens, and has that happened in the US before?
Yeah, well, now you've got, the bounties that can be made on women seeking an abortion. And now Missouri wants to do the same thing. And Florida is doing the same thing. If you think somebody is illegally voting or helping somebody vote, if somebody simply carries an infirm neighbor's ballot to the ballot box, that's now a felony in Florida. And you can sue and you can get reimbursed, $10,000 or more. And in Missouri, actually, any woman who takes receipt of, this is pending legislation, any woman who takes receipt of birth control pills that might cause an abortion, you can sue her, you can sue her family, you can sue the person who sent them to her. They're trying to outlaw even the mailing of them. And again, they're doing it with a bounty. So people who would buy data from data brokers, people who would use the fairly, it doesn't require enormous sophistication to use hacking tools to get inside other people's computers to find out what they're up to and what they're doing, or hack people's emails to see if they're ordering abortion pills by mail or something like that. I'm fully expecting to see that kind of stuff coming down the road. It's troubling.
Yeah. Here's a quick one. Maybe do ISPs know our passwords?
Yes and no. If your password shows when you're typing it in, or if they're like super good at grabbing keystrokes, yeah. My guess is that most ISPs probably have no interest in gathering that kind of data and therefore aren't. Like I said, they don't want the wrath of God coming down on them. That would be the sort of thing that would probably not inure any benefit to them. It's not the kind of data that they would sell and would freak out people in a way that would blow back on their business model.
Can you talk a little bit more about the social credit system in China? How does it run, and how is your social credit score determined?
It's run by the government. There are hundreds of different kinds of data points that are used to determine your social credit score. I listed a few of them. There's a few more in my book. It's fairly easily Googled, by the way. Your DuckDuckGo or whatever. DuckDuckGo, by the way, doesn't track what you're searching. Google does. Doesn't sell it. Google does. But I mean, we all know that. That's their business model. So I'd refer you to that.
Okay. And then this is our last one. The dichotomy of privacy versus safety. Can you tell us where you land?
Well, this is this is the struggle that has been going on since the debates in Philadelphia, and it was in late July of 1787 that they were debating, presenting a Bill of Rights and whether it should be in the Constitution or later. And, how much, and Ben Franklin famously, had that comment about, surrendering your liberties for a little bit of safety. I'm sorry, I don't recall the exact phrase, but to that effect. And it's still a big debate. I mean, right now, if you have a smart thermostat, they know when you get up, they know when you go to bed. They know if somebody in your house is going through menopause and wildly swinging the temperatures around, or if somebody is going through chemotherapy or has some kind of other medical condition that would cause them to constantly change the thermostat. If you have a smart doorbell, they know some of these companies could easily connect it to facial recognition technology and literally know everybody who comes and visits your home, leaves your home, when you go to work, when you're home, when you're gone. The largest vendor of them now will connect an entire neighborhood together along with the police department, and police departments do use facial recognition software now. Specifically this ClearView AI, among others, there are competitors. So, and that's just, scratching the surface. I mean, you buy one of these fancy beds that, tracks your sleep and moves up and down and it gets firmer or softer. All that data goes through their servers. They know your heartbeat rate at 2 o'clock in the morning. And they're selling this information. So it's becoming increasingly difficult. I mean, it's a no-brainer to create a smart thermostat that just works in your house, but you can't buy them. Every single company wants your data. It would be a no-brainer to create a doorbell that just works in your house. Nobody will sell you one because they want to have that information, because then they can monetize you. So, here we are.
Well, thank you so much for this presentation. It's very troubling always to talk about this subject, but thank you so much for your research and bringing.
Forewarned is forearmed.
Yeah, right. That's so true. So true. I want to thank the audience as well. Thanks so much for your questions. I encourage you to purchase a copy of Thom's book about Big Brother from Elliott Bay. That link is in the chat, and we can support them tonight. Hopefully next time, Thom, we'll have you in person up here. And yeah, we look forward to that.
Thank you, Candace, and thanks everybody for showing up. It's great, and please keep supporting Town Hall Seattle.
Have a good night.